is going to be called Dimitri's Dilemma. Um, my good friend Dimitri is so very wise and open-minded, aware of everything, in light of the bullshit. Dimitri is never blinded, answering all my questions, satisfying all of my wonders. Here is one of those conversations that did make me ponder. Now, before you can get a grasp of the thought and what I think is at stake, some background from previous talks, occurring at various places at frequent rate. Truths that were agreed upon from both parties. First, everything is nothing but energy. Second, it never dies, only changes. Third, we desire to pass, so we created a physical synergy. Next, our choices and path can be simplified to emotion. Also, distance is really an illusion, as is motion. And to that very delusion do we dedicate our devotion. We are all one on all levels, we are connected. Taking a breath here now, blessings bestowed that we are selected. We agree that your body has no soul, your soul has a body in which to control. Whether those ideas resonate or reverberate, phantom them as temporary truths. For an idea without obtainable evidence, yet will it make enough sense to accept without proof. At its core, it's all about dreams, whether exotic or as mundane as they may seem. Brief glimpses of alternate accepted reality. Knowing you can fly is not insanity. Becoming aware and altering the dream makes it lucid. Awful on crazy adventures, having adventures while sleeping in Houston. But see, the reality presented is never foreign, regardless if it's awesome or quite boring. I think it's wrong to mark our dreams as trivial. Science states they are created in a gland called the pineal, creating this small amount of a stout chemical, same molecule found in animals and vegetables. So now we get to the pressing question. Phrasing can be tricky, but if it's just as real for you to be you as it is the king in a celestial city, could it be possible we are not the absolute reality? What if, in essence, our soul has more than just this body? What if it has an infinite number to embody? What if we consider reality as just the soul's dream, and the reality provided created the theme? What if the chemical we consider creation of reality is simply a gate the soul comes through to create this possibility? You have to step back forward you have to step back to really move forward. And I know most will say it's absurd. And it is. Anytime you accept anything, it's simply a word. You should never accept anything you see or hear as truth, unless it resonates within your core, down through your roots. But for those within the thought, let's look, not blindly stare. If what we are living is but a dream, why do we choose the nightmare? Well, partially because loving and flying are quite fun, but you never really understand the value until you fought some demons and sometimes run. Thank you all. You're beautiful people.
Thank you. I walked upstairs with this, but I was like, Chris, can you give it to me? Because it'll make me seem cool. So, this one's called The World We Live In Isn't. Every stick and every stone you have ever seen is part of it. And so are you, and so am I, and so are all the bits of empty space between the stars and galaxies. But things might have been different in charge, or mass, or spin. I might not have existed at all, neither myself nor any counterpart. We speak truly by contradicting ourselves within the plurality of possible worlds, or the plurality of impossible ones. If we do not commit ourselves to such unrealistic assumptions, we pick out sets of worlds. We are stuck, triggered by functions that apply to the verbs believe, know, hope. That's that one. This one is the preemptive epitaph of the lone bee hummingbird. And I quoted something I found on Google, which is the bee hummingbird is the smallest bird in the world, so small in fact that it is often mistaken for an insect. Look, there flies the bubbly bee hummingbird in her cyan blue sky casket. soon her 80 per minute, inch and a pinch wide wing flaps will flop, her hover halted by heavy human hellhound hands. Give a bird a bug's death.
Next up is a regular of ours,
one of our favorites,
Alex Wolfman.
You'll have to forgive me, I haven't ever read any of this stuff out loud. Well, at least not to people. Dogs don't seem to mind. They don't give me any feedback.
Let's get out of here. I know a park where the peacocks fly and no one goes. We walked outside. The horizon was a mess of stress fractures and well decay. Battleships sailed across a steel sky. It looks like rain, I said. No, it looks like fun, she said. We stole kisses at train tracks and cruised past streets I'd only heard about. Their names tripped off the tongue like an urban catechism. Park West, Clark Crest, High Star, Moon Miss, Dashwood. The block numbers went higher and higher as we went deeper and deeper. We'd driven into a different country, with a different language, a place of elegant chaos defined by the geography of our laughter. We pulled into an empty lot, perched on the edge of forever, ready to write our names in letters of flame across the night sky. Her touch was as gentle as sunlight on snow. I want you to take me to a place beyond language, a place beyond thought, she said, with a shadow, a smile, and a coded message inside. Thank you. This next featured reader, a really dear friend of mine, Catherine Smith, is a writer hailing from the coastal Alabama area. She is currently an MFA student in fiction at the University of Houston, where she holds an in-print J.A. and Isabel M. Elkins Foundation Fellowship.
This is about an experience I had. Somebody very close to me lost their child this summer. And it's just been really difficult watching someone experience that kind of pain. There's a madness and grief that has nowhere to go, nowhere to be, no place to see, that wanders with you along a coast, under the moon, under a moon. There is no thee. Earth has one, but Saturn has 53. Even Pluto, with Charon, Hydra, Kerberos, Nix, and Styx numbering 5, is not a real planet, not in name, not anymore. Now the same as Sedna, Eris, and Make. Dwarves, dwarf planets. A dwarf because despite the spherical shape and stable orbit, it has not cleared its debris field. The rules could change, but people have a way of taking their time to reverse what makes a planet make sense. From the sand, a speck walks into the water, tide lowering from the earlier high, a trick of moon, of loon, of mond, of mesic, of selena, depending on within which border you stand. The water, when it comes face to face with its solitary natural satellite, can't help itself but to budge forward toward it, gathering itself with force to cover ever more surface. Closer, closer, closer. On this side and the other, until. The wind cries names and the speck only cries one, going far out into the waves where no one else can hear her scream his name. Does she tread and turn in the water to be sure no one was around? Dive underneath the surface? Yes. There's a madness and grief that has nowhere to go. A rip current pulls the body out into the night, farther, 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 from this side to the other, until. The speck swims parallel to the shore against the natural inclination and falls asleep in the sand, walking to a moon still in the sky at dawn and a sun in shreds behind the clouds, calling to mind that morning of signs that launched a lone journey with no answers. There's a madness and grief that has nowhere to go. There's a madness and grief that has no one to touch. There's a madness and grief. There's a madness. There's madness. Okay, so this next story is this happened when I was around 25. I got married and I was married for approximately 3 months. I was remarried and am finishing that one up now. And so I figured it's probably time to go to just, read to you guys about the first one, which I wrote this several years ago. I was in a writer's workshop at Imprint and I didn't know what to write about. So I asked the idiot I was at lunch with from my office and said, "What's something interesting about me?" And he's like, "Weren't you married one time a long time ago before?" And I was like, "Great, I'll write about that." So here goes. It's called The Annulment. I drove past the church on Spring Hill Avenue, as I'd done dozens of times in the past few months, considering what I might say if I went inside. Who would I ask to speak to? What would I say when I got in there? I'm looking for someone to tell me my marriage didn't count, that it didn't matter. Or they could tell me keep fighting, it's worth it. If I drove into any other church, the one down the street perhaps, the giant one built from red brick that still looks new 20 years later, they might tell me to fight for it, but they wouldn't tell me they can make it go away. In hindsight, it shouldn't have surprised me that the state of Alabama said it would require a divorce. Never mind that it only lasted 8 weeks. 8 weeks. 8 weeks before I'd gotten in my car to drive to a contract site one state north, before he'd packed up all our stuff and put it in separate storage units, making his way to Canada on a route that would just barely bypass the city I was in Tennessee. He did this while I was trying to find a job near him so we could create a proper married home life. In my mind, that was all that might be required to fix the 100 or so problems we'd encountered since the day we first laid eyes on each other. And these were the same problems that prevented me from putting one foot in front of the other on our wedding day. They were the same problems that made him cry 2 weeks before, swearing he wasn't a bad man after he locked me out of our apartment and pushed me, as punishment for getting all riled up, that he pushed me down the stairs. I remember when he began banging his head against the door jamb, insurance against me calling the police. Apparently, this had also happened in the movie. As if I would have actually called the police. I didn't call them when I found the emails he sent to his 17-year-old former student, messages that seemed more pathetic than telling. His declarations of love and lust quoted wildly from Man of La Mancha, having neither the respectability to refer to Don Quixote itself nor the ethics to properly cite his source. No matter, these were my fault too. Had I not been on the road so much, had I known how to avail him of this schoolgirl's crush, had I been someone he could talk to, really talk to. Jesus Christ. I was about to sign a job offer to be paid half as much by his current employer, but the trade-off was that we'd be in the same city. I wouldn't be headed to Boston or the Navajo Nation or the middle of Appalachia or stuck on a bush plane in Alaska, convinced it was going down. I'd be with him and I'd worry about the rest of it later after I took care of this offer, left Tennessee, and headed back to Alabama. "Catherine, aren't you married to John Clements?" the woman in personnel asked me over the phone. "I am." "Well, this is curious. He put in his notice last week. The paperwork crossed my desk this morning. It says he's moving due to his wife's job at the forwarding addresses in Canada. His mother lives outside of Toronto. Mississauga is what I have here, her accent thick like maple syrup. How about we pause on the offer until you two have had a moment to communicate with one another?" A subtle tremor set in my hands, one that wouldn't subside for months. "He must be trying to surprise me by moving here to Tennessee instead," I replied, semi-conscious of my spurious reaction. "It makes sense that he's using his mother's address. I'm still just living in a hotel here." "Of course," she responded. "I'll wait to hear from you. The offer will stand for 2 weeks. It's no bother. Just get back to me after Labor Day." I never signed the job offer and quit the one I had, making it home just shy of 12 hours from the time I reached him on the telephone and he sheepishly confirmed the news. I had no real home to speak of. He was already to Ohio when I crossed the county line. I never put my name on the lease. He would mail the key to the storage unit. When I moved out of my mother's house, I swore I'd never go back. My stepfather, whom she adored, held a quiet fascination for me now that I was an adult, but his interest was not always so benign. I insisted on eloping simply because I didn't want him to walk me down the aisle, because I was afraid I would take vows, imagining his blistered hands running up and down my legs when my mother traveled for business, or his wedding ring bruising my cheek when I first told him he disgusted me, standing up for myself after all the times he'd strip me down to nothing so he could take a belt to my bare skin and stare at me between the lashes. He'd taken to John as well as he'd taken to any of my adult boyfriends, a stark cry from how he'd handled the boys of my youth who made him seethe. He'd make me burn their letters while he watched, an emotionally violent act, but not a sexually violent one, and I recall being grateful for particular evenings that ended with only my notebooks in the fire. When a life falls apart, especially in the Deep South, the first thought of any girl gifted with denial is, I want my mother, and not, I can't live with her husband. So the internal negotiations were resolved neatly for me on the drive. It was either that or sleeping outside of a storage unit. Going to a friend's house would force me to admit something wasn't as it appeared, that my life wasn't as good as the pictures of it. If I started to unravel now, I might never stop. Turning into the white gravel driveway on 6th Street and walking up the steps to the front porch, I paused a few times to take note of what might be in the darkness, a force of habit I associated with being a girl. I turned the same key I always had, set my bag aside, looked at my mother, and nodded at my stepfather, stating, I think this will work itself out in a week or two. These things happen. Then I took up in my teenage bedroom, which no longer looked or smelled like I left it. 2 weeks became 4 and then 5. I woke most days by noon, at night, dreaming only that the marriage had proceeded as an ordinary one might, and therefore I was still normal by extension. First, I'd take a few sips of water and consider showering, typically committing to it by 4 p.m. The scale, which I dutifully stepped on every morning, read 135 pounds, then 124, and finally settled at 112. I hadn't weighed so little since junior high. People continued to ask about the wedding. My mother came up with a line, something about John's stepfather being sick and John taking a leave of absence to tend to him. I could never keep the story quite as straight as my mother preferred, so I added an additional malady here and there. At least once a week, I sat down to write thank you notes from the wedding gifts. Dear Aunt.
There was a valet in this parking lot, which was, believe me, unusual, but understand. This all was happening in the first quarter of the 21st century, on the cusp of what was then being referred to as the technological singularity. Nothing was unknown anymore. To speak a question within Wi-Fi range was to be enlightened by the answer immediately in pleasant, beige, disembodied female voices. You didn't have to be caught umbrella-less in a sudden downpour, having checked the weather 6 times between your 7:30 alarm and 8:45 departure through the front door. There was no need to try the strip mall Thai place on 37th that had just opened, because the strip mall Thai place on Chinoa had hundreds of 5-star reviews and a coupon for free drunken noodles to boot. We were all more beautiful than any generation preceding us, especially online. It was hard to know what to do with all of our addictions. New ones were being identified and labeled every day. Rates of anxiety and depression were rising, unstemmed by the tide of increasingly prescribed psychiatric medications. We were, in short, irreparably fucked. And under the sweet delusion we could patch our psychic wounds with 50-minute paid-for chat sessions and unobtrusive yet accessible Kleenex. The valet was there because the people seeking counsel had overflowed the parking lot, and he was paid minimum wage to double park their cars and guard the keys in his white rectangular shed until each driver emerged, blinking in the day's unceasing brightness and raw from their recent session.
So we want to bring up our first open micer, and that is the man named Jay. Come up to the stage. You can pick either microphone. You can sit down. You can read your stuff. Whatever you want to do. Come on.
Alright, y'all. I wrote this a lot of years ago when I was trying to find my feelings, and I think I found them now. So this is what I found along the way. It's called "What is Man's Most Valuable Commodity?" It has increasingly become more evident that time is the most common answer, because we're constantly trading our time for money, love, happiness, exercise, basically life's obligations, pleasures, and humanitarian contributions. But after many realizations and a few epiphanies, some very accidental, I have finally arrived at my final destination. The greatest gift is not time. Time is a man-made concept and simply a societal measure of the current establishment. If time was the most valuable commodity, Literally extracting the time from others will be the focus of society due to the inherent greed of many criminals in our environment. Instead, we focus on pleasures, responsibilities, and increasingly distracted devices associated with pleasure. In case you haven't absorbed the preceding content, the answer is coming soon. The focus of our desires are unique to our genetic predisposition. The word predisposition is not a negative connotation, but simply another measure of our fragile nature. Mankind has always been a slave to individualistic natures. Our goals are unique. The life we live is measured in time in every avenue. The amplification of time is the happiness we share. The memories etched in stone to the premier historians. The love pulsating throughout our veins, aspirated by the core of our existence. The ability to love is our greatest gift. Without love, enjoyment becomes fleeting. Life becomes miserable. The valuable time spent at our desired location becomes useless currency, no longer measured in units of seconds, days, or years, but in the negative emotion permeating our experience. To love, life, people, objects, desires, is a genetic predisposition ingrained in our DNA, but to love everything with abandon and lack of judgment can become debilitating as well. While the ability to love is our great desire, is the paramount crutch we lean upon. Our greatest gift is our weakness, and our weakness captivates our attention. You must find the balance in your life and never forget to love. Without love, our lives are bleak and meaningless, and we're not living life when love is unincorporated. You are wasting everybody else's time. Is that your desire? To waste what is perceived as life society's most valuable commodity? Is it selfish? And a perpetual issue plaguing the world. So get out there and spread the joy and the gift. You know that'll make the time you spend worth repeating, because everyone wants to enjoy life and to share the joy or love realized in the moment you will create is an immeasurable moment lasting for eternity and beyond.
So our next featured reader is Kim Philly. She was born in Singapore and grew up in Indonesia, Thailand, and Virginia. Her work across genres has appeared in the New York Times, Best American Non-Required Reading 2013, AGNI, Indiana Review, and Epiphany, among other publications. As a former journalist based in, oh my gosh, I can't pronounce this, I'm so sorry, Phnom Penh? If I totally wrecked that, I'm so sorry. She embedded with the Cambodian military in the jungles of a contested border with Thailand for the Caravan and reported on Burmese spirit possession ceremonies from Mandalay for the BBC's From Our Own Correspondent. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Virginia and is currently a doctoral fellow in the Literature and Creative Review at the University of Houston, where she's working on her first novel. Please give it up for Kim Philly, everybody, come on.
A couple language hints. Cambodians speak the Khmer language. I'm going to say barong a lot. Barong means foreigner. And I'm going to say sumto a lot. And sumto means I'm sorry, and it can also mean excuse me. And I'm going to take a swig of this water very start. was done to keep the city crowd from attempting to cross the bridge to enter the island at the same time the concert goers were streaming back to the mainland. Too many people at cross currents, too many people pushing in both directions. Her boyfriend has imbibed so much death in his 29 years, he has developed a tolerance. When he leads her through the courtyard to where their tuk-tuk driver waits, he talks animatedly of the rows of teenage dead. The hospital courtyard doubles as a makeshift morgue. Arranged in long rows on straw mats, diminutive girls, pale-faced in death. You must confront it. If not for God's grace, I would be picking through here for you, he says. No. She squeezes her eyes shut against the sunlight. Inside her there is only red. She opens her eyes. Somehow she had her own clothes to change back into. She still wears the blouse with the delicate pattern of ginkgo. The fresh pad between her legs the only evidence of the casualty left at the hospital. The driver can wait, her boyfriend says. Before she can stop him, he scoops her up like a bride and carries her to the edge of the courtyard's lone, gnarled forsythia. Behind the bare branches, she hears women keen. A mother cradles her son's bruised, blank face in her hands. The grandmother stands over the mother, wailing, shaking her hands at the sky. A tattooed man, collapsed on one knee, weeps over a little boy and girl. Revelation comes in fragments, corpses swollen by the heat, toes like fingerling potatoes, a teenage boy stripped to his fashion underwear. No, 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 she cries, cupping her eyes. How could they take their clothes? Psst, don't you know? Her boyfriend is unperturbed, but he swings her away from the half-clothed bodies. With her arms around his neck, she feels the rolling of his Adam's apple. They ripped off their own clothes. When you are slowly being crushed, you will do anything to cool yourself. Psst, they ripped off their own clothes, even the women. It makes no sense to the barong. How can you be crushed, penned, and take off your clothes? The city is awash in conspiracy and blame. There is only one fact as far as she can see, the dead laid out in grisly rows. Here, he says, this one is not so bad. She looks like she's sleeping. Why did she look? Only the barong knows the tight-laced keds had once been white. Someone has placed the girl's arms at her sides so that her palms cup the sky. Gray, long-sleeved shirt, a dazzling white glove, emptiness. The sun plays across each rhinestone, Mickey Mouse in hot-fix stones. Somto, sorry, sorry. It is not exactly a smile on the dead girl's lips. Somewhere a brother frantically phones his sister. Somewhere a mother boards a bus for the city. This girl, this extremely important girl. So far from home, there is no one here to claim her.